You're a burden. I sold Dad's company. My son's words, sharp and cold, cut deeper than any knife as he announced his betrayal, his wife Britney, silently watching. I simply smiled, a private agreement forming in my mind. All right, good luck. When they landed in Milan and discovered their inheritance had vanished, I knew the game had only just begun, and I was ready to play. You here follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has. I was arranging lilies, fresh, white, and trembling, like the breath I tried to hold, in the crystal vase Harold had bought for our 25th anniversary when I heard Wade's BMW purr into the driveway. That low, expensive engine note used to mean my son was home. Now it only made my stomach tighten. He never came unless he needed something, and it had been 3 long, silent months since I'd last seen him. Through the window, I watched him climb out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit like he belonged to a world I no longer recognized. Britney was right behind him, her heels sharp against the stone path, her platinum hair perfectly smoothed, not a strand out of place. Even from the distance, I could see the way her jaw was set, firm, determined. She had an agenda, and she was steering it. Whatever this was, she was at the wheel. The doorbell rang. Twice. No pause. No warmth. Just sharp, impatient chimes. I set the vase down, wiped my damp hands on my apron, and walked slowly to the door. My heart was already bracing itself. Wade didn't wait for an invitation. Mom, he said coolly, stepping inside like it was his house. We need to talk. Britney swept past me with the fake smile I'd learned to spot years ago. Her perfume flooded the small entryway. Floral and chemical. Too sweet. She clutched a leather briefcase like it might bite someone. Hello, Agatha, she said, saccharine dripping off every syllable. I hated how she said my name, like it was a costume she didn't want to wear. I led them into the living room where the ghosts of happier years still lingered. It was the same room where Wade had taken his first steps, giggling in Harold's arms. Now he stood in its center with his arms folded, eyes drifting around like he didn't know where he was. Would you like coffee? I just made a pot, I offered, trying for civility. Something normal. This isn't a social visit, Wade replied, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. Sit down, Mom, there's something you need to hear. I sank into my favorite chair. Harold's favorite, too. We'd picked it out together decades ago. Britney sat across from me, placing the briefcase on her lap and opening it with calculated grace. Wade stayed on his feet, looming. The company is sold, he said flatly, like announcing the weather. The words knocked the air out of me. What do you mean, sold? Britney slid a thick stack of documents onto the coffee table. The sale was finalized yesterday morning, she said, businesslike, efficient. Wade's been handling the paperwork for months. I blinked. The room swam a little. My company, the one Harold and I had built from scratch, day by day, night by night, gone, just like that. But I'm still the majority shareholder, I whispered, clinging to some piece of solid ground. Wade laughed, short, dismissive. Mom, you haven't been involved in years. Not since Dad passed. You don't understand how any of it works anymore. That's not true, I said, but even to my own ears, my voice sounded small. Look at you, Britney interjected, waving a manicured hand toward me. You can barely manage this house. Bills sit unopened for weeks. You miss appointments. You called Wade 3 times last month asking the same question. My cheeks burned. It was true, I had been calling more. But not because I was lost, because I was lonely. Because I missed making decisions with someone. I missed Harold. Wade pulled a chair close and leaned in, elbows on his knees. Mom, you're 64. You've been struggling ever since Dad died. The company needs energy, vision, relevance. I can't watch you drag it into the ground. It's still profitable, I said, firmer now. The quarterly reports show momentum from what Dad built years ago, Wade cut in. But the industry's evolving, AI, automation, digital marketing. You're not equipped for that. Britney nodded, feigning concern. This isn't meant to hurt you, Agatha. We're protecting you. The buyer paid well over market value. You'll be set for life. I looked at them, searching for any sign of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. But he was gone. In his place stood a stranger who looked at me like I was in the way. How much? I asked quietly. Wade and Britney exchanged a brief glance. $2.8 million, Wade answered, After taxes and fees, you'll have around 1.9 million in your account by Friday. A fair price. More than fair even. But that wasn't the point. You sold our company without even asking me. I'm asking now, Wade said, already reaching for the papers. I'm asking you to sign and make it official. Acknowledge that this was in your best interest. Britney leaned forward, that artificial sweetness creeping back into her tone. Think of it. No more board meetings. No more worrying about the market, employees, contracts. You can focus on what really matters. Your garden, your book club, travel even. Wade stood and paced to the window. When he turned back, his voice was like steel. The truth is, Mom, you're a burden. You've been one since Dad died. You call me constantly about things any decent manager would already know. You undermine my decisions even though you don't understand the modern market. That word, burden, hung between us, heavy and sharp. I felt something shift inside me. Not shatter, just shift. A long, deep crack, like ice thawing beneath spring rain. I sold Dad's company because it was the right thing to do, Wade continued. For everyone, for the employees, for the future, and for you. Good luck affording the rent on your new apartment, because keeping this house, it's more than you can handle on a fixed income. Brittany's eyes flashed a warning at him, but he ignored her. You're my son, I whispered. Not accusing, just remembering. And you're my mother, he replied. That's why I'm doing this. Someone had to make the hard choice. You weren't going to. Time stretched. Maybe minutes. Maybe a lifetime. I sat in the armchair Harold loved, feeling the quiet wrap around me like a shawl. My mind, surprisingly, was calm, clear. When I finally looked up, both of them were watching me, waiting. All right, I said softly. Good luck. Wade blinked. What? I said good luck, I repeated, rising and smoothing my skirt. I assume you need my signature. Britney hesitated, caught off guard. Yes, here and here, initial there. I signed where she pointed, each stroke steady. My hand didn't shake, not once. When I finished writing, I handed the pen back to Britney and walked toward the front door. That was it. Wade's voice followed after me. You're not going to argue? Not going to guilt-trip me about family loyalty? I paused, turned halfway, my hand resting on the doorknob. Would it change anything? He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it again. I didn't think so, I said quietly. Have a wonderful time in Milan. I hope the weather's perfect for your honeymoon. Brittany's eyes flew wide with surprise. How did you know about Milan? And for the first time since they had walked into my house, I smiled. It wasn't bitter or cold, it was knowing. I know more than you think I do. Once they were gone, I returned to my armchair and slowly settled in. The room looked just as it had an hour before. Same soft lighting, same books stacked neatly on the side table, the same framed photos on the wall, but something had shifted, something internal. The silence that followed didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like the calm just before sunrise, as if the day had something waiting in its wings. I reached for my phone and dialed the number I'd memorized long ago. Marcus, it's Agatha. I think it's time we had that conversation. He arrived less than an hour later, stepping into the house carrying the same worn leather satchel he'd been using since the first day I met him 25 years ago. Marcus was more than just my lawyer. He was my friend, one of the few who truly knew me. He looked exactly how I expected. Concerned, but not the least bit surprised. So Wade followed through, he asked, as he took Harold's old chair without a fuss, as if it had always belonged to him. Every word, I said, just like we predicted. I poured coffee from the pot I'd made earlier. My hands were steady now, more steady than they'd been in months. He called me a burden, Marcus. Those were his exact words. Marcus's brow furrowed, his gray eyebrows pulling together with empathy and disappointment. I'm sorry, Agatha. I know we prepared for this, but that doesn't make it any easier to hear. I sat across from him, cradling my cup between my palms. The pain stopped surprising me a long time ago. What surprises me now is just how predictable he's become. Marcus nodded. Shall we go over the timeline? He reached into his satchel and pulled out a thick folder. I nodded in return, even though I didn't need to see the pages. I knew every step we had taken, every detail, every calculated decision. We'd been preparing for this for 3 years, ever since Harold's funeral. It was that day Wade had taken me aside and gently suggested I should start thinking about simplifying my business responsibilities. It started in 1980, I began. the story flowing out of me with the rhythm of something I'd told many times before. Harold and I were both 25, fresh out of college, completely broke. I had a degree in business and a head full of ideas. Harold had charm and the kind of confidence that made investors feel safe. Marcus smiled at that. The perfect combination, except everyone always assumed Harold was the genius behind the company. I placed my coffee cup down on the table with a quiet click. The bank loans were approved because he made people feel like they could trust him. The early partnerships came through because back in the 80s, men preferred doing business with other men. So we played along, we played the game. I walked over to the mahogany desk in the corner and opened the bottom drawer. From it, I pulled out a framed photograph, one I hadn't looked at in years. It was from the ribbon-cutting ceremony for our very first office building. Harold stood at the center, scissors in hand, beaming at the camera. I was just behind him, my hand on his shoulder smiling, but my eyes weren't on the lens. I was watching the crowd. I was always watching, I said softly, more to myself than to Marcus. While Harold worked the room, shaking hands and making jokes, I was studying. I was figuring out who really had influence, who was all talk, which deals had teeth, and which were distractions. In the company structure, Marcus prompted gently. On paper, Harold owned 60%, I owned 40%. But real control, that lived in the holding companies, the subsidiary branches, the trusts, the intellectual property rights, all of which I created and managed while Harold played the part of the visionary. I moved to another drawer, this one filled with documents Wade had never laid eyes on. When Wade joined the company 8 years ago, Harold had already started showing symptoms of his heart condition. We both knew succession planning couldn't wait. Marcus adjusted his glasses and flipped open the folder. That's when you established the Meridian Trust. Exactly, I replied, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle over me. The Meridian Trust had been my answer to everything. We had structured it carefully. 70% of the company's actual value, the patents, the international contracts, the commercial real estate, had been transferred into the trust. I was the sole beneficiary. The remaining 30, which included the brand name and day-to-day operations, remained in the visible corporate structure. And Wade had no idea, Marcus said. I laughed. Not out of joy, but something drier. Wade saw what he wanted to see. He was so eager to prove that he could run things better than his old-school parents. He never asked the right questions, never looked past the surface. The sunlight had shifted by now, slanting through the windows and catching dust in the air, turning it into gold. I remembered another moment, one that stood out like a flare in my memory. About a year ago, I said, I overheard Wade talking on the phone in Harold's old office. He was speaking to Britney. She was asking him about the company's real assets, wondering if I had any actual control over the money. I sipped my coffee, bitterness lining the edges. Wade laughed, said I was just a figurehead, that I never understood the business, that Harold had shielded me from the complicated stuff. Marcus jotted something down on his legal pad. That's when you moved up the timeline. That's when I realized my son never really knew me at all. I sat back in my chair. The past settled around me like layers of fabric. Years of silence, of strategy, of deliberate invisibility. For 35 years, I've been the woman behind the curtain. I let Harold take the credit. I let Wade believe I was just his scattered, doting mother who needed saving. Marcus asked, his voice gentle. It was a question he'd asked before, many times in many ways. Because I thought that's what they needed from me, I answered. My finger traced the rim of my cup slowly. Harold needed to feel like the success was his. His pride depended on it. And Wade needed to think he was rescuing me from my own foolishness. It gave him purpose. But Harold, I said, my voice softening with memory. Harold knew. He knew the truth. I looked up at Marcus, my eyes catching his. The night before he died, he asked me for one last promise. He said, don't let Wade take advantage of your kindness like I did. Make sure he learns what you're really worth. Marcus leaned back in the chair, watching me closely, like a man reading a familiar book that still found new ways to surprise him. And now, I said, my voice steadier than ever, Wade's gone and sold what he thinks is the entire company for $2.8 million. This time, my smile was genuine, and there was laughter in it. What he doesn't realize is that he sold about 30% of the real value, just the shell. I pulled a document from the drawer and handed it to Marcus. The Meridian Trust, just yesterday, was valued at $9.2 million. He raised his eyebrows as he scanned the figures. The patents alone, $4 million. Our commercial real estate in Houston and Phoenix, another 3.5. And the international distribution rights make up the rest. Marcus let out a low whistle, interfering with the account access. That money belongs to him. I smiled to myself and stood up from the kitchen table, walking slowly to the window as I held the phone. Actually, Britney, that money was never his. He assumed it was, and I never corrected him. A lesson in assumptions, I suppose. There was a pause, then she snapped. That's theft. We'll get a lawyer. You should, I replied calmly. In fact, I recommend it. A good lawyer will explain to you that what Wade sold was exactly what he had legal ownership of. No more, no less. Britney hissed, "You tricked him." "No," I said, my voice still level, still steady. I gave him every opportunity to understand what he was dealing with. He dismissed me, said I was out of touch, too old to grasp the modern business world. So I let him play CEO while I quietly safeguarded everything that mattered. I heard a scuffle on the other end as the phone was passed again. Wade was back. "This isn't over. You've embarrassed me, sabotaged me." "No," I said. "You did that all on your own. I simply allowed reality to catch up to you." "You think you've won?" I laughed softly. "This isn't a game, Wade. This was never about winning. It was about showing you, reminding you who I am and what you lost the moment you stopped listening." He was breathing hard now. "So what happens next? You keep the money? The company?" "I continue what your father and I started. I breathe life back into what you nearly killed. And I build, Wade. That's what I do. While you chase status, I create substance. Always have." "You'll regret this," he spat. "I already regret many things," I said, my tone dipping just slightly. "Letting you believe the empire was yours for one. Letting your arrogance go unchecked for too long. But I won't regret this because now I'm no longer cleaning up after you. I'm rebuilding without you." The line went silent again, and when he finally spoke, his voice was brittle, threadbare. "You're cutting me off." "I'm setting you free," I corrected, "from entitlement, from false assumptions, from the burden of thinking you ever ran this company." He laughed then, a harsh, bitter sound. "And what do you expect me to do now?" "You're resourceful, or at least you always said you were. Show me." Then I ended the call. I stood there for a long moment, the early morning light just starting to creep through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. My tea had gone cold. My phone lay motionless on the table, finally silent. In the stillness, I felt it again, that quiet, steady power that had once pulsed through every decision I made, every deal I closed. It was back now, sharp and alive. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. And I was just getting started. The assets he was trying to claim weren't his to take. Legally, it wasn't even possible. I'd reviewed the incorporation documents myself. He tried to challenge that, said I'd only seen some of the documents. I corrected him. "The ones Wade intended for you to see," I clarified. Then I asked, "Did you happen to look at the Meridian Trust files? Or the subsidiary filings under Patterson Holdings? Or even the intellectual property assignments in Delaware?" Silence. That told me all I needed to know. "I didn't think so," I said, continuing with a calm finality. "You see, Britney, when you spend 4 decades building something, you learn how to protect it. You learn the value of what doesn't appear on the letterhead." Then Wade's voice came back on the line. This time there was fear tangled in it. "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son. We're family." "Yes, Wade," I said. "We are family, which is probably why you felt it was perfectly acceptable to call me a burden and try to sell off what you assumed was the culmination of my life's work, without so much as asking me." I got up from my seat at the kitchen table, walking to the window. The sun was just starting to rise, painting soft pink hues across the sky. "Tell me, Wade," I asked, my voice level, "did you really think I was so far gone that I wouldn't notice what you were doing?" "What? Planning?" "I wasn't planning anything," he stammered. "I was trying to help you." "No," I said simply. "You were trying to help yourself. You thought this would be an easy inheritance. You bet on me being a fragile old woman. You convinced yourself I was helpless." Then Britney grabbed the phone again. Her voice was high and sharp, spiked with panic. "This is elder abuse. We're going to sue you for everything." I laughed, genuinely laughed. "With what money, sweetheart? And which attorneys? The ones who still haven't been paid? You're both standing in a hotel lobby in Milan with no access to your funds. Am I wrong? We'll find a way." Wade cut in again, trying to sound confident. I'll call everyone I know. I'll reach out to Dad's old partners. They'll help me. They'll loan me what I need to fight this. You mean the business partners whose contracts are now void? I asked. Because the company they signed with doesn't exist in any real capacity anymore? Or maybe you're thinking of the ones who are currently negotiating new, better deals with Meridian Trust. On the other end of the line, I heard a sound that landed somewhere between a groan and a sob. It confirmed everything. You planned this, he accused. You planned all of this. I prepared for this, I corrected him, calm and clear. That's different. I hoped I was wrong about you. I really did. I hoped you'd prove to me that you cared more about our relationship than about what you could take from me. I do care, he said. No, Wade, you care about what you thought you could get from our relationship. There's a difference. From the background, I could hear the busy hum of the hotel lobby in Milan, people speaking Italian quickly, the soft ding of an elevator. I imagined how uncomfortable it must be having this kind of implosion happen in public, stranded and vulnerable. How long have you known? Wade asked, voice quieter now. Known what? That I was going to sell the company. I thought about lying, pretending I just realized it recently. But he deserved the truth, even if it hurt. 3 years, I said plainly, since the week after your father's funeral, when you told me I should start simplifying my business affairs. 3 years, he repeated, stunned. So for 3 years, you've been watching me, listening to me, waiting. For 3 years, I've watched you circle like a vulture, I said. 3 years of hearing you and Britney whisper about my memory, my age, my competence. 3 years of preparing for exactly this moment. Britney's voice came back, this time shrill with real desperation. We can't stay here without money. Do you understand that? They're going to kick us out of this hotel. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said with a trace of amused detachment. After all, you're both far more competent than I am, right? Surely a minor setback like being stuck in Europe without funds isn't nothing for two savvy business minds like yours. Mom, please. Wade's voice broke. I made a mistake. I get it now. Just tell me what I can do to fix this. For a second, just a second, I felt that old pull. The instinct to swoop in, to solve everything, to be the mother who makes things okay again. But then I remembered how just yesterday I'd heard him call me a burden. I remembered what that felt like. You can start, I said, by figuring out how to get yourselves home from Milan without me. Consider it a lesson in self-reliance. You can't leave us like this. I'm not abandoning you, Wade, I said. I'm giving you a taste of independence. Isn't that what you wanted? To be rid of the burden that was your mother? There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of his breathing. Then, in a voice that was small and defeated, he asked, "What happens now?" Now, I said, as the rising sun bathed everything in warm gold. You learn what I've always known, that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. And respect isn't inherited, it's earned. I hung up, then I silenced the phone. That had been call number 13. If my math was right, I had about 40 more to go. I brewed a fresh cup of tea and returned to my seat at the kitchen table, tablet in hand. There were emails to read, business decisions to review, a company to run. The real company, the one that had never stopped being mine. Outside, the world was waking up, aglow in a brilliant new day. By noon, my phone had logged 37 missed calls. I'd turned the ringer back on at 10, curious to hear how their tone might evolve as the reality of their situation began to sink in. I wasn't disappointed. The voicemails began with confusion, shifted into anger, dipped into pleading, swerved into threats, and eventually looped back into desperation again. As the hours passed, Britney's voice took over more of the messages, her earlier attempts at charm abandoned entirely in favor of high-pitched demands. I was outside in the garden when the 38th call came in, trimming the rose bushes Harold had planted for our 20th anniversary. I answered on the first ring. Good afternoon, Wade. Mom? He sounded drained. We need to talk. Really talk. I'm listening. No, not like this. Not over the phone, face to face. We're coming home. I paused, pruning shears still in hand. With what money? I thought your cards weren't working. I called Uncle Robert. He's sending money for the tickets. Harold's brother? Robert? The one who'd always been envious of our success. I could only imagine what story Wade had spun for him, probably painting me as a bitter old woman robbing him of his rightful inheritance. That was resourceful of you, I said. We'll be back tomorrow evening. Will you be home? This is my home, Wade, I said simply. Where else would I be? Wade went silent for a moment. Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm going to fight this, legally. I can't just stand by and let you destroy what Dad built, Harold's legacy. I echoed his words slowly, deliberately. Tell me, Wade, what do you think your father's legacy actually is? The company, the business he built from the ground up. We built from the ground up, I corrected him silently, then said aloud, we built it, your father and I, together, though I suppose I can see why you'd forget that detail. Fine, he said, brushing it off. You both built it. Still doesn't change the fact that you're tearing it down. I laid my pruning shears gently on the stone garden bench. One Harold had made for me after my first cancer scare, a decade ago, and sat down. The summer roses were blooming, but I barely noticed them now. I'm not destroying anything, Wade, I said evenly. I'm protecting it. Protecting it from who exactly? From you. That caught him off guard. I could hear it in the way his breath hitched. There was a long pause before he replied. From me? Mom, I'm trying to honor Dad. I'm trying to carry on what he started. No, Wade, I said quietly. You're trying to cash out. Fast. So you and Britney can live a lifestyle you haven't earned. My voice remained calm, steady. The buyer you found, Stewart Industries? They specialize in buying companies just to dismantle them. Strip the assets, fire everyone. Did you know that? Silence. I didn't think so. Did you know they're planning to close our Austin office and relocate everything to Mexico within 6 months? That 43 families would be out of work before Christmas. I didn't, he faltered. You didn't ask, Wade. You saw a number with lots of zeros, and you didn't stop to ask what it meant for the people your father and I spent 40 years building this with. The people who've been this company as much as we have. I could hear Britney in the background, her voice tense, too distant to make out, but unmistakably insistent. The employees would have found other bomb, Wade muttered, but he sounded less like someone making a point and more like someone grasping for a defense. Margaret Henley has been our office manager for 18 years. She's 56 and doesn't have a college degree. Do you really think she'll find another job that pays what we do, that gives her the same respect, the same dignity? I didn't give him a chance to answer. Tom Rodriguez started working with us when he was 22. His daughter just started college. Tell me, Wade, how's he supposed to pay tuition if he gets laid off? It's business, Mom, not charity. People get hurt sometimes. You're right. Business isn't charity, but it's not theft either. There's a line between making tough decisions and making selfish ones. There was a commotion in the background, an argument in Italian. Hotel staff, maybe. I could picture the scene. Wade and Britney in some sleek lobby, flustered and underdressed for the moment, trying to reason with people who didn't give a damn about their sense of American entitlement. We'll be home tomorrow, he said, tight-voiced. We'll settle this properly. I look forward to it. When he hung up, I stayed seated in the garden, surrounded by the hum of crickets and the faint scent of rosemary. I thought about the conversation, about what it meant and what was coming. I knew Wade. He would lawyer up the second his plane landed in Austin. He'd try to find a loophole in the trust, accuse me of manipulating Harold, of taking advantage of his illness, that I'd tricked him. What Wade didn't know was that I'd been ready for this moment for years. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. Let me guess, he said, not even waiting for me to speak. They found out about Milan. This is call number 38. They're flying back tomorrow on Uncle Robert's dime. And Wade, he's threatening legal action. He thinks he can overturn the trust. Marcus laughed lightly. I'm assuming you're prepared. Pull the video files, I said. All of them. Every board meeting, every family dinner, every office conversation. If Wade wants to claim I manipulated his father, let's show everyone exactly who was manipulating whom. I had been recording everything since the day Wade first started questioning my decisions. Questioning me. Not covertly, but not obviously either. A voice recorder in my handbag at dinner, voice memos during phone calls, security cameras in the office that caught more than just potential break-ins. I'd learned long ago that documentation was protection, especially for women, especially for older women, especially in business. How extensive are we talking? Marcus asked. Extensive enough, I replied. Wade telling Harold I was slipping, that I was confused about simple business concepts. Wade suggesting it was time to transition me into an advisory-only role. Wade plotting with Britney on how to persuade me that selling was in my best interest. And Harold's responses. I smiled, remembering how he'd defended me every time. How he'd told Wade I was the reason behind most of our wins. How he'd said, word for word, your mother could run circles around most CEOs half her age. And if you can't see that, you're not as smart as I raised you to be. No, Wade wouldn't be expecting that. He never had. And that had always been his biggest mistake. That night, I made myself a quiet dinner. Just grilled vegetables and a piece of bread, and sat down at my desk to review our financials. I wasn't just managing a holding company. Meridian Trust had become something far bigger. While Wade obsessed over the headquarters in Austin and clung to our local clients, I had been growing us in ways he hadn't even noticed. Our partnership with the sustainable manufacturer in Germany was outperforming the entire Texas branch. Our licensing deals in Japan had doubled their value in less than 2 years. The inventory software we'd patented, companies across 3 continents were now using it. Wade thought he was selling a company for $2.8 million. He didn't realize he was offering up the weakest slice of an enterprise worth over $15 million. My phone buzzed, a text from an unfamiliar number. This isn't over. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. Buh. So Britney had figured out how to send texts internationally. Maybe she borrowed a phone. Maybe Uncle Robert caved and paid for messaging. Either way, I typed back. The biggest mistake of my life was letting you into my family. I'm fixing that now. The reply came instantly. Dee will never forgive you for this. I stared at the message, feeling a slow, unfamiliar calm settle into my chest. Not fear, not dread. Relief. Good, I typed. Maybe now we can have an honest relationship. I turned my phone off after that. Harold used to say that the best business decisions came from a quiet mind and a peaceful heart. Tomorrow there would be lawyers, accusations, drama. But tonight, I wanted peace. Mother into signing over control, but I stopped the playback before it reached the end. Silence settled thick over the room, heavier than any scolding I could have delivered. Wade's face had gone pale, the color draining as if the blood itself had turned cold. Britney recoiled like she'd been slapped, her lips parting, but no words coming out. Her eyes darted toward the front door, calculating. Maybe whether she could still salvage her part in this, or if it was too late. I trusted you, Wade repeated, but the conviction had vanished. Now his voice sounded more like a question, like he was trying to convince himself of the version of events he clung to for too long. No, Wade, I replied quietly. You didn't trust me. You underestimated me. I stood slowly and gathered the papers from the coffee table, slipping them neatly back into the manila folder. My movements were calm, deliberate. In contrast, the atmosphere around my son and his wife was unraveling fast. Britney finally found her voice, brittle and sharp. You've ruined us. No, I corrected, meeting her gaze head on. You ruined yourselves when you started treating people as obstacles to conquer rather than as partners to build with. This isn't revenge, Britney. This is consequence. Wade sank back into the couch, rubbing his temples like he could somehow massage clarity into his clouded thoughts. What am I supposed to do now? He muttered, almost to himself. That's up to you, I said, voice even. But tomorrow morning when your lawyer arrives, I suggest you listen carefully. You might learn something about business, about law, and maybe, if you're willing, about humility. I turned toward the hallway, pausing only briefly to glance at the photos still lining the wall. The little boy with the confident smile, the teenager beaming with promise, the young man ready to take on the world. I had loved every version of him, and I still did. But love didn't mean allowing myself to be used. As I walked away, I heard Britney whisper, barely audible, we have nowhere else to go. I stopped, but didn't turn around. Then I suggest you both start thinking about how to move forward, instead of dwelling on what you thought you were entitled to. And with that, I returned to the kitchen, where my tea had long since gone cold, but the peace I'd found remained warm. Wade had spent the better part of that afternoon slumped on my sofa, his face drawn, the arrogance long drained from his eyes. It had taken very little to unravel the polished image he had tried to maintain, the right recordings at the right time. When I played the first one, the color drained from Britney's face instantly. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Wade made that call from my kitchen last December. It was the night of the housewarming. You'd stepped out to buy wine, I said calmly. Wade assumed I was in the bathroom, but I was just around the corner, with my phone in hand. Wade collapsed back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "You've been recording us?" he groaned. "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "Something you learn after 4 decades of being underestimated by men who think they're the smartest in the room." Without giving them a chance to respond, I pulled out another phone and hit play again. This time, Wade's voice rang out clearly in a conversation with Harold, just 6 months before my husband passed. "Dad, I'm worried about Mom," Wade was saying. "She's been really off lately, confused about basic business things. I think it's time we start moving her into more of an advisory role. I should be handling day-to-day stuff before she does something that wrecks everything." Harold didn't hesitate. His reply was steady, grounded, unmistakably firm. "Son, your mother has forgotten more about business than you've ever known. If she seems confused to you, it's because you're not paying attention. She's been out maneuvering people half her age while you've been caught up in office politics." The next part was harder to listen to. Wade's voice turned sulky, almost whiny. "I just think some fresh thinking might be useful. Some of her ideas feel dated." Even through the speaker's tiny grill, Harold's laugh was full-bodied, unfiltered. "Wade, your mother closed a $2 million international deal last week while you were griping about the coffee in the break room. Maybe spend less time criticizing her thinking and more time developing your own." When I stopped the recording, Wade looked sick. Britney stared at him, her expression morphing from confusion to something far more dangerous, realization. "You told me she was losing her mind," she said slowly, her voice tight with betrayal. "You said doctors were worried she might have early dementia." "I never said that," Wade muttered, his voice thin. "You absolutely did," she snapped, her voice rising. "You said we needed to move fast before she made financial decisions that could destroy everything. You said she was a threat to the family's future." I stepped in before he could spin another lie. "There were never any medical concerns. I had a cognitive evaluation 4 months ago during my annual checkup. The results were clear, no mental decline whatsoever. I can show you the paperwork if that would help." Britney turned back toward Wade, disgust carved into every line of her face. "You lied to me about everything." "I didn't lie," Wade said, now desperate, clutching at the last scraps of justification. "I was trying to protect our future. Mom's getting older, and I thought." "You thought you could rob your mother and convince your wife it was for her own good?" I cut in. "The only question now is what you plan to do next." Wade looked around the room like a cornered animal. "I'll contest the trust. I'll get the best attorneys in Texas. I'll prove you manipulated Dad when he was sick." "With what money?" I asked, not unkindly. "Your credit cards were declined last week, remember? Uncle Robert paid for your flights. Do you really think he's going to bankroll a years-long lawsuit against a trust that's been managed by professionals for over 30 years? "I'll figure something out," he mumbled. "You could," I said with a shrug. "Or you could accept where things stand and decide what kind of relationship you want from here." Britney stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I'm not staying for this," she said coldly. "Fix it, Wade, or we're done. I didn't marry a man who lies about millions of dollars and then loses it all because he's too stupid to keep it." Her heels clacked hard against the wood as she stormed to the front door. Wade made a move to follow her, but then hesitated, turning back toward me, defeated. "What do you want from me?" he asked, voice cracked. "I want you to decide if you love me or if you just love the idea of what I could give you," I said softly but firmly, "because one of those relationships might have a future, and one definitely doesn't." He stared at me for a long beat, then without a word turned and left. I watched from the window as he and Britney argued in sharp gestures beside their rental car. She climbed into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and they sped away. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Wade. "Mom, I need a place to stay tonight. Britney threw me out of the hotel." "The guest room is available," I said evenly. "Rent's $50 a night. You'll need to pitch in with chores." "50, he said, stunned. "I don't have $50. "Then you'd better figure out how to earn some." There was a pause. "Are you seriously going to make me homeless?" "I'm going to let you experience what independence feels like without a safety net. Call it a crash course in personal responsibility." "But I'm your son." "Yes," I said, my voice unshaken. "And it's time you started acting like it." And 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen pouring coffee into 2 mugs, an easy rhythm, now as natural as breathing. Sunlight poured through windows that gleamed. Wade had washed them the day before as part of his weekly cleaning duties. The house had never been so quiet or so full of peace. "Morning, Mom." Wade stepped into the room, jeans and a button-down, hair still damp from the shower. The designer suits had all been sold months ago to cover groceries and rent. "Morning," I replied. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," he said honestly, reaching into the cabinet to get the mugs, a motion that had become instinct. "I reviewed the quarterly reports last night," he added as we sat down. "The German partnership is performing 18% above projection." I handed him his coffee, black, the way he'd gotten used to it since we stopped spending on fancy machines and flavored creamers. "In Tokyo?" I asked. Contracts should close by month's end. Your timing on the market was spot on." It had taken him 3 months to let go of the bitterness about working for his mother instead of inheriting her company. Another 2 months to realize he was finally learning about business for real, more than he ever had when he thought success was owed to him. The change hadn't been quick or pretty. After Britney left him at the hotel, Wade had crashed on friends' couches, trying to scrape together cash for a lawyer. But one by one, they'd stopped answering his calls when it became clear he couldn't pay them back. Even Uncle Robert had refused to support a legal fight once Harold's lawyer confirmed the trust was airtight. 3 weeks later, Wade had shown up at my door, worn out and finally humbled. He had shown up at my doorstep with a single suitcase and a question. Was the spare room still available? "I'll pay the 50 a night," he said, standing on the porch, worn but composed. "And I'll take care of the housework. I just need somewhere to stay while I figure out what comes next." "What comes next is up to you," I told him then. "But if you're staying here, you follow my rules." The rules were simple, yet non-negotiable. No drinking, no drugs, no overnight guests without permission, rent paid weekly in advance, and house chores done without complaint or delay. Most important of all, if he wanted back into the family business, he'd have to earn his way up from the bottom. No handouts, no shortcuts, no special treatment because of blood, merit, and nothing else. Now, months later, I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand. "I have a meeting with the Henderson Group this afternoon," I said, glancing up at him. "Want to sit in?" Wade's eyes brightened. "Really? They're one of our biggest prospects." "They are," I nodded, "but they're also famously difficult. I thought it might be useful for you to see how we handle demanding clients." 6 months ago, that suggestion would have sparked defensiveness, maybe even a fight. Wade back then was too proud to accept the idea that he had anything left to learn. But this Wade just nodded, eager and focused. "I'd really appreciate that. Should I prepare anything ahead of time?" "Review their file, go over past partnerships, think about what might be making them hesitant and how we might address those concerns." "Already done," he said, pulling a notebook from his bag. The pages were dense with notes in his handwriting. I was up past midnight researching their corporate structure and recent market setbacks. A warmth rose in my chest, unmistakable and familiar. The same feeling I'd had when he was 8 years old and spent hours building the perfect Lego castle, determined to get every brick right. Somewhere along the line, I'd lost that version of him. It felt good, relieving even, to catch glimpses of that boy again. "Wade," I said carefully, "I want you to know I'm proud of the work you've been doing." He looked up, surprised. "You are?" "I am. When you first came back, I wasn't sure whether you truly wanted to change, or if this was just the only place left to go." To be honest, at first it was just the only place left to go. His cheeks reddened a little. Those first few weeks, crashing on couches, I was planning how I'd prove you wrong. I was going to take back what I thought was mine. But after a while, I realized what I thought was mine, it never really belonged to me in the first place. He set down his coffee and looked me straight in the eye. "I've spent 35 years chasing some idea of dad that wasn't even real. I thought being a man meant taking what I wanted, never showing weakness, never asking for help. I thought strength meant never admitting when I was wrong. And now," I asked gently, "now I think dad succeeded because he was smart enough to marry someone smarter and humble enough to take her advice." Wade's voice was steady and sincere, and I think I missed out on 35 years of learning from the most capable person I know because I was too arrogant to see past my own pride. My phone rang, breaking the moment. I glanced at the caller ID, a number I hadn't seen in months. Britney. Wade noticed the name too and stiffened. "Are you going to answer it?" "I'm curious what she wants," I said, tapping the screen. Hello, Britney. Agatha, hi. Her voice sounded different, smaller, unsure, lacking the sharpness I remembered. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. It's fine. What can I do for you? I was wondering, is Wade there? I've been trying to call him, but his number's disconnected. I looked at Wade. He was shaking his head quickly, silently. He's here. Do you want to talk to him? Actually, she hesitated. I was hoping to speak to you first. There's something I need to say. Wade raised his eyebrows, but didn't stop me when I tapped the speaker button. I owe you an apology, Brittany said. A real one. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong for encouraging Wade to do what he did. What changed your mind? I asked. Life, she said with a dry, bitter laugh. After I left Wade in Austin, I moved back in with my parents. I've been job hunting for 6 months. It's humbling. I forgot what it felt like to actually work for things instead of just expecting them to come to me. I see. I've also had a lot of time to think about our marriage and about the kind of person I was when I was with Wade. I didn't like her. I was selfish, entitled, comfortable with manipulating someone who had done nothing but love and support her child. Wade stared at the phone, his expression unreadable. I called to apologize to you, Brittany continued, but also to tell Wade something important. The divorce papers are being filed this week. I'm not asking for anything beyond my personal belongings. I don't deserve more than that. Brittany, Wade said quietly, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Wade, you made your share of mistakes, but I made everything worse. I made you see your mom as an obstacle instead of a partner. I convinced you that using her was somehow justified. I'm ashamed of that. I'm sorry. When the call ended, the kitchen was silent for several minutes. How do you feel? I finally asked. Relieved, he said without hesitation. Sad but relieved. I didn't like the version of myself I was when I was married to Brittany either. He looked around the kitchen, the quiet morning, the simple breakfast dishes still on the table, the honest work waiting in our schedules. I think I'm finally becoming someone Dad would have been proud of. Your father was always proud of you, I said softly. He just wanted you to be proud of yourself too. That afternoon's meeting with the Henderson group exceeded expectations. Wade asked smart, thoughtful questions, took thorough notes, and offered insights that clearly came from hours of preparation. When the clients asked about our succession plans, I was able to point confidently to Wade, now our director of operations, a title he earned through 6 months of 60-hour weeks and unwavering dedication. After they left, we remained in the conference room reviewing the meeting. I think they're going to sign, Wade said as he organized his notes. I think so too. You did excellent work today. He smiled at the compliment, then grew serious. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When you set up the trust structures, when you protected the assets from me, did you know it would end up like this? Me working here, learning everything the right way? I thought for a moment. I hoped it would, I said, but I was ready for the possibility that you'd walk away and never speak to me again. I would have taken over the company myself, kept it running as best I could until the day I couldn't anymore. And then I would have found someone I trusted. Someone who would look after our employees like family. That's what I would have done. I paused then, my voice catching on the truth that had lived quietly inside me. But I would have missed you every single day for the rest of my life. Wade's eyes shimmered with tears. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for putting you through all of that. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between protecting me and protecting yourself. You didn't make me choose, I said gently. You made a choice about the kind of son you wanted to be, and I made sure that your choice came with real consequences. I looked at him, steady and calm. If I'd chosen differently, if I'd kept battling you in court, dragging everything out, maybe then you would have learned something harsher. That respect isn't something you can inherit, and it's not something you can force out of someone. You don't get it by demanding it. You earn it. Wade nodded slowly as if the weight of that truth was finally settling in his bones. I think I'm starting to understand. We packed up in silence, both of us taking our time, letting the moment breathe. Just as we were about to leave the office, Wade turned back to me one more time. Mom, I turned to him. Thank you. For what? I asked softly. For not giving up on me, he said. For seeing the person I could be instead of just accepting who I was. A smile pulled at the corners of my mouth. I thought about everything it had taken to get here. All the pain, the distance, the fights, the silence, the hope. That's what mothers do, Wade, I said. We love our kids enough to let them fail, And we love them just as much to help them rise again. I paused, my eyes searching his face. Even when they call us a burden, especially then, because that's when they need us the most. 6 months ago, I thought I was losing my son, thought I was watching him slip away behind a wall of entitlement and pride. But I hadn't lost him. I'd found him, found the real version of him, buried deep beneath the surface, the man Harold and I had always prayed he would one day become. It had taken losing everything for Wade to finally see what truly mattered, and it had taken risking everything, for me, to protect the one thing that truly did, our relationship. As we walked out of the office side by side, I felt it settle in my heart, that quiet, profound certainty. This, this was what real victory looked like. Not the moment you win an argument, not the instant you prove you were right all along. No, true victory comes when everyone involved finally understands what the fight was really for. And for me, it had never been about control. It had always been about love.